Tecnosul is a company with more than 35 years of experience. We have developed a costing system for industry called Allora, used by major players in Brazil and around the world. In this video, we will explain the concept of PEU, production effort unit, which is used by Allora to correctly cost the production process. Traditional ERP systems use the RKW method in their costing modules, but it has flaws that generate large distortions in product costs and margins. To demonstrate this, here we have a cost center composed of 4 operations, which we call operational positions. The RKW method will take the total amount spent on that cost center and divide it by the number of hours worked there, thus generating an average fee for the cost center. Now, think about the following situation. 2 products from the same cost center have different processes, but the same manufacturing time of 2 minutes. The RKW method would say that these products cost the same, which is wrong. Imagine that OP2 uses much more energy than the others, or has a much higher depreciation. The costs of these products should be different. So, how do you calculate the margin of a product? You take the sales price, remove taxes, commissions, and obtain the net revenue. From this, you subtract the costs and get the margin. All the variables above are very accurate. There is no apportionment, distribution, they are simply data from the ERP. As for the cost, we must consider both the material, which is raw material plus packaging, and the cost of the production process as well, which includes labor, energy, depreciation, etc. But this is very questionable. For example, how was the energy distributed? How was the workforce distributed? How was cold and steam consumption distributed? And this impacts the margin that will have the same precision as the previous variable. That's what we want to fix. What happens when we implement PEU in a company? The company already has product costs calculated by the ERP costing module and sets a sale price based on this. From this, there is an expected margin. But what if we say the cost is here? This is excellent news. The margin is much greater than expected. Now, what if the cost is here? It is a warning point. The margin is lower than expected, but it is still positive. The problem is when the cost is here, the product has a negative margin, makes a loss, and this was not known. In addition, it is taking up factory capacity. Imagine if it is a high-volume product, immediate actions must be taken. The cost of the product is made up of 3 elements. It consists of material, raw material plus packaging. Transformation, which is the production process. And overhead, which includes administrative expenses. Material costs are already registered in the ERP system, but we can take this data to Allora. The transformation cost will be calculated according to the PEU method, and will be explained shortly. All of this will be built in the Allora system. But, what does PEU mean? It is the unit that allows measuring any and all production. This is important because companies typically measure using units of the International System of Units. For example, slaughterhouses usually measure production in tons, while furniture companies measure it in cubic meters. But, when production appears lower, it does not always mean that it was a bad or idle month. It could be that products with higher added value were produced in that month. So, this unit acts as an effort meter between the items produced in the factory and is directly related to the cost. For example, here on the screen we have 2 lockers. On the left, the basic model that consumes 35 PEUs. And on the right, the model with password and internal gears that consumes twice as much. And how do we collect the amount of PEU for each product? First, we must calculate the cost per hour, that is, the standard cost of each operational position in the factory, considering these variables. The idea is to look at each operation and ask, when this operation occurs, what does it consume? Here, we have an example with 4 operational positions. Machine 1. Machine 2. Machine 3. And a manual operation. On the right, the cost hour values of each of them are described in dollars. It may be that after 5 years, the first machine will no longer cost $250, but $400 due to inflation and collective labor agreement, for example. But the second would be worth $800, maintaining proportionality. To have a fixed variable over time, we must transform this cost hour from dollars to PEU, through a procedure that we call base product. Analyzing the operational positions again, but in PEU per hour, it is important to highlight that the proportions are maintained. The second continues to be worth twice as much as the first, and the last half. If the factory does not make any changes, these indexes will be maintained. They will only be changed when we actually change the process. For example, when an optimization is done, this number will be reduced. After calculating the PEU per hour rates for each operational position, we can relate them to the product processes to find out how many PEUs are needed to produce them. For example, here we have product A that uses operational positions 1, 2, and 4. We multiply the PEU rates of each operation by the time required for the product in each one of them. After that, it is easy to see that the operation that requires more effort, and is more expensive, is the second one. However, if you didn't know PEU, and were using the traditional ERP method, and these operations were in the same cost center, you would say that it should be the first, as it takes the longest, and that is wrong. Furthermore, you would say that the second and last ones have the same cost, because they take the same time, which is also not true. The absorption principle, which is already used by ERPs and is required by the tax authorities, will not stop being used. For those unfamiliar, this principle requires the company to distribute its monthly transformation cost among products. What we will do differently is the criteria adopted to make this distribution. We will use the number of PEUs of each product instead of time. To conclude, how do we transform the costs of products from PEU to money? We must take the total transformation cost of the factory, or each area or cost center, and divide it by the number of PEUs produced in the month. This way we calculate a fee that represents the unit cost of the PEU. In this example, we have a fee of 44 cents per PEU. Note that this fee changes every month, and can be an interesting parameter for analyzing the factory's efficiency over time. Reviewing the map of product A, we have the quantities of PEUs of each operational position. We must multiply these values by the calculated fee of 44 cents per PEU to obtain the cost of each operation in dollars. Adding them all up, we obtain the manufacturing cost of product A of $17.60. Would you like to learn more about the Allora system and all its features? Contact us by email, phone, WhatsApp to schedule a presentation.